Hello, today let's discuss fundamentals of critical reasoning. Come to think of critical reasoning, CAT per se has stopped asking direct critical reasoning questions for at least 6 years now. It has moved on from critical reasoning to logical continuation. But then, critical reasoning is something which just cannot be done out with. Critical reasoning would be in some format asked in terms of some question in an RC, wherein you will be asked to know whether you agree with the author or not, disagree with the author, whether if there is a weakness in the argument of an author, or if an author is making a particular conclusion, what is he assuming behind making such a conclusion? All those things is where we assess the author and is writing critically, and that is what we call as critical reasoning. Today, we'll be only addressing the fundamentals of critical reasoning, wherein we'll try to break down critical reasoning or a particular argument of a critical reasoning into various parts. A standard question of critical reasoning is generally an argument, and it is broken down into 4 parts generally. One is called the premise, one is called the additional premise, if at all it is there. One is a counter premise, again if it is there. And there's a conclusion, again if it is there. So the only one which is certain is a premise. A premise by definition gives a reason why something should be believed. A conclusion is the point the author tries to prove by using another statement. Additional premise as well as a counter premise are the ones as the name suggests. An additional premise is sometimes additional data along with the given basic premise, and counter premise might indicate as if it is going against the premise, but that is the one which sometimes helps us conclude. Some premise indicators are things like the things that follow words like because, since, for example, for the reason that, given that, as indicated by, due to, etc. Additional premise generally follow indicators like moreover, besides, in addition to, furthermore, etc. A counter premise, as the name suggests, would generally carry indicators like but, yet, however, in contrast, although, still, whereas, in spite of, despite, after all, etc. Conclusion indicators would be, as the name obviously suggests, words like thus, therefore, hence, as a result, consequently, accordingly, clearly, shows that, conclude that, etc. Let's do one thing. Let's understand how it is crafted. See, there's a premise. An author would be trying to conclude something out of the premise. There are chances that the argument itself has a loose premise which leads to a loose conclusion. Such things can be called as a weak argument. Every weak argument would have loopholes, and those loopholes is where the questions like which one of them can strengthen the argument, which one of them can weaken the argument, what would be the assumption that the author would be making, and such kind of questions prop up. On the other hand, a strong argument is where good chances that the premise, additional premise and counter premise are so well crafted that the option that we might be asked to find out as an answer would be what is the conclusion that the author is trying to make. Let's take a couple of examples. For example, first one, every year new reports appear concerning the health risks posed by certain substances such as coffee and sugar. One year, an article claimed that coffee is dangerous to one's health. The next year, Another article argued that coffee has some benefits for one's health. Here the author is trying to conclude something vehemently, that from these contradictory opinions we see that experts are useless for guiding one's decision about one's health. There is a visible loophole. On one side we are talking about one report, on the other side we are talking about another report, and then we are concluding that analysts are useless. See, this is too strong an argument to be right, and therefore it's a weak argument. Weak because it is not a well-crafted argument. Just a loose talk. You feel that some particular movie did amazing. I feel that the same movie was crap. And therefore, if at all we end up concluding that we don't have a taste for movies, is too harsh a statement to be made, and therefore it becomes a very weak argument. Another example number 2, some teachers claim that students would not learn curricular content without the incentive of grades, but students with intense interest in the material would learn it without this incentive, while the behavior of students lacking all interest in the material is unaffected by such an incentive. The incentive of grades, therefore, serves no essential academic purpose. Smart moves by the author. Firstly, he talks about people who have intense interest. Secondly, he talks about people who lack all interest. What about the people who fall in between? And on the basis of these two extremes, he is making a proper conclusion wherein he says this incentive serves no essential academic purpose. Again, too strong to be true, therefore it's a weak argument. The loophole is visible. He's talking about two extremes and concluding about everybody. Therefore, it's a weak argument. If we pick up another example, if relativity theory is correct, no object can travel forward in time at a speed greater than the speed of light. Yet, quantum mechanics predicts that the tachyon, a hypothetical subatomic particle, travels faster than light. Thus, if relativity theory is correct, either quantum mechanics prediction about tachyons is erroneous or tachyons travel backward in time. A very well crafted argument. If one theory is correct, then something happens. If the opposite thing happens, that means the theory is not what we are looking back to. That means if the quantum mechanics predicts that the tachyon is traveling faster than light, that means they are traveling backward in time is a strong, well-crafted argument. This is an example of a strong argument. Any argument that you come across in critical reasoning, first thing, look for a premise. Second thing, look for a conclusion and see if the premise, counter premise and additional premise craft you to a conclusion or not. Happy reasoning.